what was supposed to be my second child turned out to be cancer instead. At just 21 years old, I had to make a decision that I'm sure saved my life. I decided not to tell a soul because I knew that their words, their fear, their grief, their doubt could all have power over me. And I couldn't afford for anyone to be speaking death over me while I was so determined to fight for my life. My name is Shamiria, and this is No Sugar on the Rocks. I fought cancer in secret. I fought my husband in silence. And I learned that survival required controlling my words because words have power and sometimes are the difference between life and death. This is episode 3, How I Survived not one, but 2 cancers. We're in Jacksonville, North Carolina when I get my first pregnancy test. My first son is 2 years old. And if I'm being honest, I started trying to have a baby almost immediately. Partially because my mom always said that an only child is a lonely child. And the other part was due to being married and my husband wanting another child. And I wanted to be able to do that for him. We tried and we tried and we tried. And month after month, we just came up empty. So this particular time, I remember us walking through a Walmart and I got a 6-pack of wine coolers and I got a pregnancy test. And the deal was I was going to take the pregnancy test and then if it said a negative also, like everyone had said before that moment, that we just drink the wine coolers and we'd have an awesome night. But if this one time it said positive, my husband would drink the wine coolers in celebration. And so I got home and I peed on the stick and it said positive. And we stuck to the plan and he drank to celebrate. The very next day, I'm calling around to doctors' offices and I'm trying to get an appointment because I have been trying for this baby for at least a year and a half. And I finally got my baby and I want to check on my child. And at that time, the doctor's offices that I was calling kept saying that I needed to be in my second trimester before they would schedule me an appointment. That was so disheartening to me. And so I decided I would go to the hospital and I'd tell them that I was having some type of pain in my side and that I wasn't sure of pregnancy. But I knew that if I went to the hospital, they would give me a pregnancy test and they would also do an ultrasound to rule out any emergency situations. And that's what happened. I went to the hospital and they immediately sent me back to the ultrasound room. I remember going back to the ultrasound room and having to sit there about 2 hours before someone took me back for the exam. And I remember being in the exam and the woman just clicking. And she asked me a couple questions like, when was the last time you had a period? And, how long have you had pregnancy symptoms? And, just different questions that eventually just started to make me feel a bit uneasy. So I remember asking her, was everything okay? She said, everything is fine, but I can't really give you any information. You have to wait on the doctor. I'm just the ultrasound tech. You have to wait on the doctor. We go into the waiting room where I sit another 7 full hours. And by the end of this time, I know for sure that something is wrong. They call us in the room and there's not one doctor, but there's a doctor and there's 2 nurses. And they come in and they give me the news that my HGC levels, my hormone levels were high enough for me to have been in my second trimester. But on the ultrasound, there was no sign of life, no sign of a child anywhere. And of course, I asked if there could be any mistake and if maybe the baby was small, and they assured me that there was no baby there. My heart broke in more pieces than I can count. They relay the information and I do my best to keep my cool and to keep calm because my son at the time is 2 and he's also here in this room and I don't want to do anything that's going to incite some type of commotion or scare him in the least bit. I'm trying to remain calm and I'm trying to remain seated and they're talking and they're telling me that it looks like I miscarried placenta matter and that anything that would be inside of your uterus, your body is going to read pregnant. But this was in fact not a pregnancy. This was a miscarriage is what they called it. They asked me to come back that following day to go through a D&C. And that was a procedure that they would do to clear any of the matter out of my uterus. They assured me that the D&C would be fast and that I would be feeling like myself in no time, shortly after the procedure. I remember crying, but managing. This isn't an ideal situation, but, you know, much like all the other difficulties that I had experienced before that time, I'd roll with the punches and it was going to be okay. I didn't give anybody that information because nobody knew that I was pregnant in the first place. And so I could skip the pity and whatever other story and whatever other emotion that one could evoke on a person in that moment. And I kept it to myself. I go when I get the DNC and I go home and they tell me that within 48 hours I should be feeling a lot better. And I wasn't. I went from feeling bad to worse. And I had a checkup 7 days later. And I go back and they do another ultrasound on my tummy and they realize that the tissue that was in my uterus that they had removed 7 days prior had started growing back again. And so they needed me to have another DNC that day. So 7 days later, I go back under anesthesia, back into that procedure where they scrape out the tissue in my uterus. Only this time they send it off for a pathology report. After this procedure, I feel a little bit better. But they call me about 4 days later and they ask, well, how are you feeling? And I tell them I was doing better. I feel well. They asked me to come inside of the doctor's office for a face-to-face checkup. I remember going with my husband and with my son and going into a different room that I had went into prior at that facility to be seen. And this time, the pale lady sat in front of me, voice low, almost a whisper. Has to be the creepiest conversation I've ever had with anyone. But she sat there and she said to me that they sent off the pathology report and the findings were fatal. She said that I had a cancer in my uterus and that it was the most vigorous uterine cancer that there was. She told me that there was a cure for the cancer, but that it would rapidly move to my brain, my heart, and my lungs, and that I should enjoy the time that I had left with my son and my then husband. She whispered my ending like it was the best kept secret of the day. I sat there with no words to share, holding my breath in hopes that that would also hold every emotion that I felt. After she shared that information, she sent me down the hall to another office. And in that office sat a man that handed me a small rock with the word Jesus written in red paint. And he handed it to me and said, Jesus is your rock. He gave me a list of churches that I could call to get my life right before it was too late. They spoke to me in a tone that said my obituary was prepared. I remember walking from the back of that building, having to walk all the way back through the building, through the maternity ward, through the admissions, check in and check out, through all the smiling faces, bouncing babies and round bellies, to my car where I let out the most hurtling scream that a person could fathom. I remember trying my hardest to accept that I was about to die. The world felt quiet and still. It's like time stopped for I don't know how long. But this felt like the biggest slap in the face after everything that I had experienced my entire childhood, through all of the violence against me, through all of the malice acts, through all of this keeping on and keeping on that I've had to do, through all of this moving on, through all of this growing, forgiving. This is how I was going to end. I was going to die from a uterine cancer. Life just was not fair. And nobody was going to convince me that it was. I remember going back home and choosing to go get in my bed and my husband allowing me to do just that and giving me my space. And I remember laying there and I could barely cry, just asking God, how on earth could you drag me through this life? Let someone put a baby here and then you kill me off with cancer and leave the kid with no mom? Like, this is crazy. I lay in bed as Jaden run up and down the hallway, and his joy and laughter and bliss did something to my spirit. And I go from asking God why and how and what if to just saying, like, I can't die. Like, this can't be it. Like, somebody has to raise my kid. I have to be a mom. Like, I can't die. And as clear as day, I heard a voice say, then don't die. Get up and live. And so I began to denounce death by illness right then and there. I decided right then and there that I was not going to die. Regardless of what the diagnosis was, regardless of what the pale lady said, regardless of the rock with the name of Jesus, I wasn't going to die. I remember getting out of bed in that moment and coming out of the room and walking down the hallway and basking in the joy of my son and just telling my husband at the time, like, I don't want to share this information. I don't want to tell people what the doctors told me. I don't want us all to be in agreement to my death. I don't want to die. And so I remember telling our parents and just begging them to not tell a soul else and just asking them to not worry, don't call me and don't mourn me while I'm alive. I want to be happy. I want to be full of life while I'm living. If I'm going to die, I don't want to die prematurely. If it's all going to be over anyways, I want to live while I still got a chance. And so I did. I actually remember visiting my oncologist for the first time, and I'm sitting there, and this is before cancer treatments start. I'm sitting there and she comes into the room and this Indian lady and she has this blue hair, blue highlights in her hair. And she's like, hey, how's everybody doing? How y'all doing? And I'm sitting there completely petrified. I mean, I've just been sitting in a waiting room and I've watched cancer patients walk past me one by one, decrepit, sickly, ill. And here I was, 21 years old, hair full of hair, looking at what I thought was my future. And you're asking me, how am I doing? I mean, I'm obviously barely sitting here. And so she asked me, so what do you know about your diagnosis? Tell me everything that you know. And so I shared with her what I knew and what my process had been like and my experiences up until that point. And she looked me in my face and she said, I don't usually take cases like yours, but when they called me and they explained to me what was going on and they told me that they had given you 2 DNCs, I could not help but to see you. And she said, I told them, don't touch her again. She said, they called me and they asked me to give you a full hysterectomy. She said, and after I confirmed with them that you were only 21 years old, I refused. And I told them to go no further and that I would take it from here. She said, you're not going to die from cancer. And you will have as many babies as you want after we beat it. We will not give you a full hysterectomy. You're going to be okay. And I chose to believe her. I hung on to every word that she said like my life depended on it because it did. I started chemotherapy. And I remember going to each appointment and forcing positivity, forcing myself to speak life, to see life, forcing myself to speak health and wellness over my body, going inside of my appointments and speaking to all my oncologists and my nurses and asking them how their day was. And I was often told how not often it was that they would see a cancer patient who would come in and ask them how they were doing. And I was asked where my positivity came from and why I was always so happy. And I was so happy to share to them that if I'm going to die anyway, that every day that I'm alive, I'm going to live. I'm going to live. And that energy and that spirit was contagious. And I started to note the power in my words and the energy that I was putting out, regardless to the situation that I was in. I experienced violence at the hands of my husband throughout my journey with chemotherapy. I knew that while surviving this one cancer that I still had one to go. But this cancer fight was teaching me that I was created capable. On top of chemotherapy, homelessness took my family by storm. Whether it was a bad agreement that I had with a family member or bad business deals that Jay was doing, cancer did not deter homelessness. Cancer did not detour domestic violence. Cancer did not detour estrangement. I fought like hell the entire time, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, but I didn't complain. I kept as much of this grief to myself as possible. In my mind, if I didn't share it, it wouldn't expand. If I didn't share it, it wouldn't keep growing. If I didn't share it, it couldn't live, right? If I didn't share it, then people couldn't say it. And if they couldn't say it, then it would have to cease to exist. And at that time, the only thing that I knew is that I did not want people mourning me while I still was alive. I did not want people sad about a death that had not yet come. My body responded so well to cancer treatment that they sent my case off to get a second opinion. They started to doubt that I had cancer to begin with. The cancer, in fact, did not spread to my heart, my lungs, or my brain. I had no complications during chemotherapy at all. So from that point on to beating cancer in under a year, regardless to what was going on around me, I felt invincible. I felt so capable. I learned that I could control my healing by controlling my words. I learned that by refusing to let anyone, including myself, speak death over me while I was still living, I learned that I gave myself a fair fighting chance. So while I did feel empowered, and while I had gone through and gotten through and grown through another traumatic experience, I was still married to my abuser. And that wasn't changing. The abuse wasn't changing. By the end of my cancer fight, I could see clearly. I could understand so clearly why it hadn't been a baby instead. I was so grateful that it was not a baby instead. Leaving didn't come easy. It took a lot to finally get to that point. But I'll tell you the point where I knew for sure that leaving was closer than any other decision that I had to make. I don't remember what the fight was about. But what I do remember is his hand around my throat. I remember being thrown around the house like a rag doll, hitting damn near every wall. I remember fighting, physically fighting for my life, clawing his eyes, his ears, his neck, his face, anything that I could grab. I remember finally getting away and making it to my phone to call for help because this time had to have been one of the worst times. And I remember the look on his face when he acknowledged my attempt. He smiled. Call him, he said. Remember what they said last time? Whoever has a mark, the other person goes to jail. And since we both have a mark, we'll both be in jail. I've been to jail before, he said. I'm going to be all right. You the one with the child. Who going to get him? Nobody? You going to go to jail and he's going to go into the system. Call him, he said, taunting me. I sat there completely out of breath, hurt from the inside out, contemplating what my next move would be. And that's when I knew that I had to leave. Even if I didn't want to, even if I didn't have a plan to, even if I didn't have anywhere to go. Because if I stayed, one of us was surely going to die. And it was not going to be me. I had successfully beat cancer, and I was not going to let this man kill me. Being a person who felt undeserving of love, I was also a person who was understanding of the faults of other people. And it really wasn't until this moment that I realized that everything that was happening to me at the hands of this man was intentional. It was calculated, and it was dangerous. And that's when I started planning my escape. I fought 2 cancers. One was in my body. The other one was leading my life. I beat the one that was in my body in less than a year. But the one that was in my life, that one took much, much longer. Because you can't chemo your way out of an abusive relationship. You have to choose to leave. And choosing is the hardest part. Next episode, I'm going to tell you how I left and what it actually cost me. This is No Sugar on the Rocks. I'm Shamiria. And if you're fighting 2 wars right now, one that people can see and one that they can't, I need you to hear this. You can win both, but you have to choose yourself first.